Hello and welcome. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior Vice President and Executive Editor at Large at Black Enterprise, and you're here for another edition of Beyond the Hype. This episode of Beyond the Hype is brought to you by Synchrony, and we have a really special, important conversation. As you know, since the murder of George Floyd, Black Enterprise has been having ongoing conversations with leaders in different aspects of corporate America about what DEI means, what the renewed emphasis on DEI means, and how do we measure our progress both in corporate America and beyond going forward. And today's conversation fits in with that ongoing theme on Beyond the Hype. We are here with the Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Corporate Responsibility Officer of Synchrony, Michael Matthews, who's going to give us insights into what's happening at Synchrony, what's happening in corporate America at large, and his own views as a Black executive in corporate America about where we are and where we're going. Please welcome to Beyond the Hype, Michael Matthews. Michael, thank you for joining us for this show today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited about the conversation.
So before we get started, let's talk about your path as a professional, in corporate America. How did you come to be and do what you do today? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. Well, first of all, a lot of people will agree with me. The most important thing is I'm from Detroit. Uh, I've been with Synchrony for about 22, 23 years, and all in HR. And I chose HR basically coming from Detroit, and my grandfather was a black executive when there it was very unusual for to find a black executive. So he always instilled in me and my siblings that it's very important to whatever your way is, but find a way to give back and to help lift up us and the race. And so I found that through my HR career, I've been able to lean into certain individuals who may have been overlooked or may not have gotten an opportunity. And so that's really been kind of one of a guiding compass for me through my career. But a couple of years ago, it just happened. There was a great nexus of it was time for me to find a different role. And we were going through a corporate reorganization of HR. And the chief diversity officer position was open. And I thought it was a great opportunity, not only to lean into those diverse aspects of the HR career and even get into them more deeply, but expand my own personal career. So that kind of led me to being the CDO or Chief Diversity Officer, and I've been doing that for about 3 years now.
You hit some important themes that have been ongoing themes whenever I interview corporate executives, again, in the diversity space, in the HR space. Think of a couple of people I've interviewed in the sales space across industries. And there's
Yep.
certain themes. First of all, I repeat an adage that I often tell to both executives and entrepreneurs that I mentor, that being a first anything is not an achievement, it's an assignment. That being the
Right.
first Black is not, I mean, it's wonderful for you, but it's really an assignment. And people in the HR and CDO space, CDI space, understand that intrinsically because what you're really doing is opening doors and shaping culture. And the other, again, thread that has been through all these conversations is that, I'm putting this out there, not necessarily because I just want to get your take on it, is that DEI today, maybe more than ever, is as much about shaping culture or reshaping culture for the future as it is about anything with regard to what companies look like in the present. That in order to effect a systemic change that we want to see over time, it's about culture change, and culture change is about what are the values that you're bringing into the company, and that is very much determined by who you bring into the company and what they think of the company as they come in, because they're there to shape culture, not just to do a job. Now, that I'm speaking as a layman who just talks to executives and experts. What's your take on that idea?
I agree with everything you said, and it's kind of like DEI, or as we say, a synchrony, EDINC, because the synchrony, we put equity first, we lead with equity, and that was an evolution for us. But it's all intertwined. So you can have representation, and if the culture is faulty, then you're not going to be successful. Or if you have a culture that's questionable, or it's not representative, or if it's not reflective or enticing for people of color or diverse people, then your representation is going to be not as successful as you want it to be. So, through the course of kind of our work at Synchrony, what we found was that initially we were very strong on the culture. And we actually probably thought we made assumptions about everything else because our culture was so strong. And not until we started leaning into the data, and we launched our initiative, Advancing Diverse Talent, which I can talk about a little later. But not on, not only not until we did that did we understand that we had some opportunities. We could be even stronger if we leaned into representation. And as we started our representation journey, and we've made a lot of progress there, what we learned is, it's not just about going out there and getting people or bringing people into the organization. It's a much broader set of circumstances and much more purposeful work that we have to do around equity, around making sure that people have the right opportunities, the right development, the right access to be able to compete and win. And so that's why we say at Synchrony, equity, we lead with equity. Equity comes first because it's really at the foundation. Without it, nothing else is going to be as successful as you want it to be. I don't know if that answers your question.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
At Black Enterprise, obviously, we've been at the heart of discussions of diversity and inclusion in corporate America for, well, we're in our 52nd year as a company, but,
Yeah.
so we've had these conversations over the decades. And one of the things that I think has emerged that I think a lot of people still don't necessarily appreciate, and you kind of touched on it. We think of HR and CDI and CDOs and inclusion is kind of almost, I'm talking about outsiders, is kind of a important but soft people. You know, I don't think people appreciate the degree of data and
Hmm.
analysis that the companies that are really serious about this
Yeah.
apply the same degree of scrutiny and data and analysis that they do to sales, marketing, the technology of their companies. Talk a little bit about both before the quote unquote tipping point of the George Floyd murder and since then in terms of Synchrony saying, yeah, we were culturally focused and now equity focused today. Talk about what the role that data and analysis plays in your ability to do the things that you do.
That's a great question. I'll start first by saying, even before I start talking about the data, just the way that you think about it and the way that you elevate it makes a difference in your success. So, for example, after George Floyd and really COVID as well, many companies were going through points of transition, and what we did at Synchrony is we identified six what we call strategic imperatives that beyond everything, these are the six key things that at Synchrony we needed to focus on that are of prime importance, and we added a seventh one, which was diversity. So that's our CEO, our CHRO, our board of directors, lending identifying and really lifting this up as a chief imperative for our company. So that made the difference in itself. But to your point, when we came into, I'll talk about when I came into the role of chief diversity officer.
Okay.
Like I said, Synchrony was known to be a place that leaned into diversity, had a strong culture, and all of that was legitimate. Uh, but one of the things that I was curious about in coming into the role is I felt that many companies were using diversity as maybe a public relations exercise. The approach was like, look how great we are. We're diverse, and here's how diverse we are. And at Synchrony, we were doing some of that where we were saying we are X% diverse. Aren't we great? And what we weren't doing, and me as an HR person and then me as a black man specifically, I was like, yeah, that diversity looks great, but what's under, those numbers? You're X% diverse, but how many of those are black people? How many of those are Hispanics? Et cetera, et cetera. And so what we did was we started running the numbers and unpacking what our diversity representation looked like. And it was good in comparison to other financial services companies. It was something to be proud of. That being said, what we did in addition to that is we took a step back, we took a look back. So we did a 3-year walk. And this is when I did a review with our executive leadership team and our board of directors and giving them more of a holistic picture of what we look like from a diverse perspective. And what we found was, yeah, we look pretty good, but based on what we thought about our culture, we were pretty stagnant over the years. We hadn't been moving the needle. And I thought the hypothesis was that, we weren't leaning in enough in certain aspects in our certain areas of opportunity to actually make the difference. So we launched Advancing Diverse Talent, which is our period. Once a year, we stop everything. We go into heavy data analytics mode. And what ADT or Advancing Diverse Talent tells us is like, based on what the data shows, based on what the demographic data shows us from census, these are your areas of opportunity. So for us, for the last 2 years, it's been African Americans and Hispanics at the vice president and above level. So that doesn't mean we take our eye off the ball anyplace else, but that means that we are laser focused at making sure that we increase the opportunities, we make sure that we have people who are prepared, that we make additional efforts to make sure that we find people in those demographics to compete and actually win the jobs. So, that's how we're using data. And as ADT or Advanced Diverse Talent has matured, we've expanded to realize that, hey, it's not just representation data. We need to look at our staffing data. So we've gotten sophisticated enough to say, hey, if you're ex-leader who leads an organization and you've done 600 hires last year, out of the 600 people out of the 1,200 people you've recruited, this many people have been in this demographics, this many people made it on the interview slate, this many people were converted. So we can actually have a conversation with you about, and point specifically to where your opportunity areas are. So if you're ex-leader, your opportunity area may not be that you're not recruiting enough people. It's like, what's happening in this interview portion where you're recruiting people, they're meeting your minimal qualifications, but they're not getting converted into interviews. And look, once they actually make it to the interview slate, they're actually pretty high rate of conversion. So data really can be very informative as to if you're really serious about moving the needle, making that contributions, having a board and an ELT and a CEO that's willing to fund you enough to make those kinds of commitments can really be a game changer.
You make a couple of really important points, because what you're talking about, well, two things that come immediately in mind. One, you're talking about managing a pipeline. Like you said, it's not just about, we got X amount of people here. It's how do you integrate that into the pipeline of bringing talent in, moving them to the right places in the company to achieve your objectives, which are not objectives in isolation.
Right.
Companies that put their diversity efforts there's this thing over here we want to be able to do, but it has nothing really to do with the core reason our business exists. The companies that are really successful at this says, no, we have to be able to integrate this into the DNA of how the company operates and grows, because we still have to meet the larger objectives of our company, for our customers, for our shareholders, for other stakeholders who are impacted by our business. At Black Enterprises, we do a number of different lists where we measure, the performance of diversity of companies. We just released our boardroom power report, literally this past week, measuring, representation on corporate boards. And we look at overall workforce diversity, diversity in senior management. I think that jives with what you're saying about VP level on up. We look at supplier diversity, and then we look at board diversity. And we kind of say those are the kind of 4 things that we tell our audience, pay attention to those things, because you can really see, which companies kind of emerge from the pack. Because if you don't come up with that, like you said, if you don't do the analytics, then it does kind of devolve into an image conversation, promise conversation. What the term that came out during the COVID emergence of that period was a performative, diversity, performative responses. And again, companies that are very serious about, diversity, yeah, they're going to be concerned about the image because your reputation of your company matters to the value and perception of the company. But if you stop there and you don't get deep into the analytics and say, what are we actually measuring? Because what gets measured is what gets done
That's right.
everywhere, and certainly in corporate
That's
America.
right. That's right.
So talk to me about some of the other KPIs that you personally, your division, and obviously the broader company looks to measure where you're going from. Again, this is not something you fix in 6 months. This is an ongoing, constantly evolving, decades. When you're talking about this space, but what are the kind of the key KPIs that you pay attention to, that our audience should pay attention to, and that you think other companies should be paying attention to if we're really going to create what I call a set of best practices in this space that people can kind of wrap their arms around.
Mm, of course. Well, one of the things that I'll jump right off of what you just said is it's ongoing.
Mm.
So at Synchrony, we don't look at specific targets or some people want to call them quotas. We don't do that. What we do is we do ongoing progress, year over year progress. So like I said, we have this process every year. We do a 3-year look back. We do a deep dive. And what we do is we do a quarterly review with every member of the ELT on how they're doing in relation to what they've done over this current year. So like we were just about to do the third quarter reviews and over the last 3 years. And so we're very focused on year over year progress. And so ADT tells us where our key focus areas are. So for the last couple of years, it's been Black and Hispanic at the VP plus level. But we look at all demographics in that review just to make sure that we're moving the needle across the board from a diversity perspective. So we have those key um, demographic diversity representation figures that we look at on a quarterly basis and on an annual basis. And what I would mention is you can measure, and like you said, it's not going to get done if you don't measure, but it's also not going to get done if you don't have accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And so our diversity metrics, that year over year progress factor, is tied to our annual bonus for all leaders of the company. So if you're not showing year over year improvement in the ADT categories, then your bonus will be impacted. So that accountability factor is a big one as well. But you know what? The data is important, but we also get a lot of voice. We have that culture of candor. So I get real time feedback on everything I do. Um, and I really take it seriously. What I've learned over the years is the loudest voice isn't always the voice that represents the majority of the folks, but it is important just to get that more objective, I mean subjective kind of feedback as well, to inform, how things are landing, and because in so many ways that's kind of made us adjust our approaches to things. For example, when we were doing COVID, supporting our organization with COVID, we had people come in to talk to our different demographies and our different diversity networks, or ERGs, because different people were approaching it from different perspectives. So, like in the Black community, we have some vaccine hesitancy. So, we had folks come in and talk to us about vaccinations. That being said, we got some feedback, real time feedback, that, hey, it's nice that you had these folks come talk to us, but it would be really cool if we had some Black folks come talk to us that could really identify what some of our concerns were. Great feedback, common sense feedback that maybe when you're in the mix of things you don't think about. So we went out and we got a physician, Cass Tech graduate from Detroit, of course, but talk to us about the issues, and could talk about her aunts and uncles and things that she went through with her own family, and that just increased the effectiveness just that much. So we do rely heavily on data, but that other subjective, more real time word of mouth feedback is important too, and I would never minimize that as well.
Yeah, I would emphasize that. I tell people, numbers can tell you a lot, but they can't tell you everything because even numbers are open to interpretation. So without
Right.
that context,
That's right.
you said the word candor, and this applies not only black people and Latinos in corporate America. This is what I heard from across the board because between our CEO Butch Graves has a series similar to this one called From the Corner Office. So he's interviewing
Hmm.
his peers, the CEOs of S&P
Yeah.
500 companies, and we're interviewing white executives, black executives, and the single biggest I think is the most important change if we look at pre George Floyd corporate diversity and post George Floyd corporate diversity was I was told over and over and over again that for the first time perhaps in the history of corporate America, people were willing to just be honest. Like not
Yeah.
just the black people saying amongst themselves saying, you know how it is, this is not really right, or not just non-black people or white males saying, I want to say something, I want it, but I don't want to be perceived the wrong way, and I don't want to start any
That's
trouble.
right.
And everything that happened between the pandemic and George Floyd finally said, okay, y'all,
Yep.
we got to at least be able to be honest about what we're feeling, how we're feeling in this environment. And for the first time, I heard company after company after company say, we just got everybody in the room and created safe spaces that you could say what you had to say. You weren't going to be branded a racist. I'm not going to
Yep.
tell you that you got a chip on your shoulder. It was like the first time in the history of corporate America where people could say, okay, this is what's happening with us. And for those companies that have emerged and made progress over the last 2 years, not that they're there, it's because now we can, everybody's looking at the same thing, speaking the same language, giving
Yep.
each other room to be safe. And that's been critical for executives in roles like you to really say, no, I'm building solutions, or we're building solutions around what's really happening
That's
versus
right.
around what people say are happening because they don't want to really they don't feel safe enough to say what they really mean and mean what they really say and feel like they're not going to be punished, dismissed, ignored. So talk about, I don't know what the experience was in Science Synchrony, but some of these listening sessions that I've heard, different corporate executives and leaders tell me about inside the company, for that was unprecedented until these past couple of years.
Yeah, it's you described it perfectly. What people don't really realize is the work that has to go into that for it to be effective and constructive and to be done well.
Mm,
So, right after George Floyd, I mean, everybody was emotional, everybody had an opinion, a perspective. You described it perfectly. Some people needed to talk, needed to get it out. Some people were afraid to. People had questions. And so we did have to create a safe space for that to happen. And I think we did that. But we also had to prepare people for those conversations. And what was interesting is to realize and to help people understand that everybody needed some preparation. First off, we needed to prepare leaders to even ask the question, or to start the dialogue, to be able to respond to it. We had to be able to assess, was everybody equipped to lead these conversations, because everybody's not able.
true.
And some people, you don't want to lead in those conversations.
Right.
And even for us as Black folks, um, we we wanted and we needed to have these conversations, and in some cases we were going into these conversations with expectations,
Mm,
for people to come, at a certain way, or say certain things, or just be quiet and listen. And so we also had to do some works to say, hey, if we're gonna tell the organization we want to have these conversations, then we need to be prepared to listen. We need to be prepared that there are going to be some people who might have the best intentions who make a mistake,
right.
and we can't be ready just to trounce because they made a mistake. And white folks or others, you have to understand that you might not get everything right, and you might make a mistake, and you got to be prepared. And so there's a lot of, you're right, we created those safe spaces, we were having those conversations, we had them, but there was some, you don't I don't think that if you want to really be effective, you just put everybody in a room and say, we're going to have this conversation. You got to do a lot of work to make sure that it's constructive and that it evolves and that we get something out of it. And what I'm really proud is, you know, for us, it wasn't just a point of time. It wasn't just post George Floyd or right after George Floyd. Because a lot of folks, what I saw with a lot of companies is they had the conversations, it died down, or they think it died down, and then they went back to normal.
Right.
For us at Synchrony, we've continued that progress. We have initiatives like a group called Women Confronting Racism that still hosts regular meetings today. We have our global diversity experience, where it's our annual conference, and one of the key things and the most successful things at the GDE was a panel where we had 4 people coming from 4 different perspectives, self-identified.
Mm-hmm.
We had like Christian conservative, we had a Black male, we had Asian, we had everything, and they talked about everything. And when I talked to other CDOs, they can't believe that we had conversations. They talked about Roe v. Wade. They talked about gun control. They talked about the cultural elements of those things, violence in our communities. And what we wanted to show is that you can have these conversations, be constructive. You might not change minds, but you might come out understanding perspective, or you may change your mind. But what I'm really proud of in the work that we're doing, it wasn't just George Floyd. If there's anything that came out of it, it like launched some progress. But for us, it wasn't a temporary thing. It's an ongoing thing. And so it's been great to see.
Well, you just described the difference between, you know, a crisis response, and ongoing culture change. And again,
Right.
for things for progress to be made after the headline dies down. And again, now, while the George Floyd moment will never be forgotten in our country, probably,
Yeah.
it's not front of mind anymore. So but have you changed culture enough that you don't need
That's right.
Breonna Taylor or George Floyd or something that to make us say, we got to pay attention to this.
Right.
And there's something
Right.
else that you said, and again, it resonates with some of the conversations I've had over the last 2 years about, you know, most of the time when we think of unintended consequences, we think of negative outcomes that we didn't expect. But I've heard from a number of people that another consequence that we didn't really think about, but we're seeing the promise of it emerging. And I'll frame it this way. The current generation of Black people in particular, executives in corporate America, is maybe the first generation that's fully into careers where they have to manage diversity too. Like for a long time, managing diversity meant people handling quote unquote us appropriately so that we could progress and feel safe and appreciated in corporate America. But now you have enough Black and other non-white people rising to positions of authority in corporate America. Maybe not in the numbers that we want, maybe not as much, you know, as great a representation as we like. But now we have to know how to manage diversity too. And part of what I was told by a particular HR expert, executive corporate recruiter, was that we are now spending more time, whether it's incidental or intentional, on the idea that, in this case, Black people have to know how to manage people of cultures other than theirs. That it's not just being managed in order to rise through senior management and senior executive positions that ultimately to the C-suite. And you think of great leaders like, you know, Ken Chenault and Ursula Burns when she was at Xerox. They couldn't do that if they were just good at managing Black people.
That's right.
They had global responsibilities and cultures, you know, forget about all over America, but all over the world, and they couldn't be credible leaders as Black corporate leaders if all they were good at was being really good at making, you know, help getting Black people to perform. So I don't know what you've seen as an HR professional, as a chief diversity officer, but this idea that one of the benefits is that now you have, because of these conversations, that this is not just what can we do to get white male executives to do the right thing. It's like, how do we all create a culture where we're all, you know, managing with respect, with the actual goals of the company in mind, with a new cultural standard that applies regardless of your cultural background and how you identify.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. You know, in this diversity work, kind of like I was talking about in the last example, you know, you can't just come with an ask, you have to come prepared to listen and to understand and to learn. And you're right, we're in positions that we haven't traditionally been in, and so we leverage that hopefully to be more effective. And if not, we won't be successful. But what I would say too is I think that diverse people, specifically Black people, maybe Hispanic people as well, part of our ascension has made us uniquely prepared to be in those situations where we manage people that are different from ourselves. I think that especially when you get old like me, you've been through through times when you felt like you needed to either assimilate or make sure that you are perceived in a certain way, or you may feel like you have to fight a certain bias, whatever the case may be. And what I found is that many times that creates an ability to be more nimble than average, to be able to be more influential than average, to have your communication be more diverse and more effective than the average person. So I do agree with you that those are things that we need to continue to be successful as leaders and as we continue to ascend. But I also think that if we look at some of the challenges that we've overcome or that we've experienced, and we lean into them and look at really the muscles that we've been able to create or to bolster over our careers, we're even more equipped than we may think we initially are.
Oh, that's very encouraging. I hadn't heard that perspective before, which is the whole point of Beyond the Hype, because we want to hear things we haven't heard before.
Right.
But we talked a lot about okay, internal, inside, because especially for large corporations, what's key to performance is two things: how do the people inside the organization feel, and the kinds of people you're bringing in, and while you're not doing it, like you said, this is not about a publicity stunt or just looking good in the eyes of the world. There is true value on the books for being perceived as a company that's doing it the right way, that's
Oh
leading the
yeah.
right way. So talk to me about what you try to communicate to the customers you serve, to the communities that you operate in, to the stakeholders who may not be customers but may be impacted by your business, around where Synchrony stands, where Synchrony is trying to go, in terms of how it's perceived in an environment that's still hypersensitive to which corporations are doing the right thing and which ones seem like they don't care or even are being malignant in this area of a changing systems of inequity in our society.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, let me say, outside of them, it just makes good business sense for companies themselves. Their employees, especially in a market like this one, they have choices. They have many choices, and certain employees, and especially employers who are prioritizing hiring diverse talent. Um, Diverse talent looks for companies that are, that have people like themselves in their workforce, in leadership positions. What kind of culture do you maintain? So many conversations that I've had with people who said, I gave Synchrony a second look because of the diversity initiatives, because of what you stand for, because I've heard about what you're doing. I also have had more and more people want to have a conversation with me before they make the final decision. And so it makes good business sense in terms of attracting the right talent, to be a company that prioritizes diversity. Because a diverse workforce has been shown to be a more productive and a more valuable workforce. But you're right. And let me know if I'm not answering your question, but we look at, like I said, we call it EDINC, equity, diversity, inclusion, and citizenship, holistically. So maybe about a year, 18 months ago, we have the citizenship, that operated as a totally separate team. And so that team, and it reports up to me, but was responsible for the Synchrony Foundation, for any of our philanthropic aspects, and they operated totally separately. And we said, if we're really about equity, if we're really about diversity, shouldn't they be linked? Shouldn't your philanthropic aspirations be linked with your diversity aspirations? Shouldn't what you're doing in the community and what you stand for in the community be linked to what you stand for internally? There shouldn't be separate. And so, for example, last year we launched our Education as an Equalizer initiative, where we're specifically focused on diverse and underserved communities that are our diversity networks help us identify what those communities are. We've allocated $50 million to different agencies in those communities because we're linking our external vision and our external efforts to those of what we're doing internally. Because you can't, do you really have credibility if you're doing one thing outside and another thing internally? So it's very much synced at Synchrony.
And of course, I don't call names or mention any names, but if I could tell you how many times we at Black Enterprise have observed companies that their internal values don't jive and sometimes even contradict with
Right.
their, community/philanthropic.
And what does that say?
And
Yeah.
right, what does that say? Either you're
Right.
schizophrenic, or you don't really know what your goals are, or you're insincere on one
That's
level
right.
or another. And of course, both for individuals and companies and organizations, kind of the first bellwether of whether there's an emotional response to what you're doing is authenticity.
That's right.
I always tell people there are people who I disagree with, but I trust them because I know they're being authentic. Like, it's not about whether we think the same way; it's whether I can trust that they're actually being who they say they are. And I know that that's also true. I've seen research about our emotional responses as consumers, as like I said, when we're looking for a job, there's what the company's telling me, and there's what I emotionally believe. And if
Right.
I emotionally believe that you're not a good place to work, or you're not a good company for which I should be spending my money, all the data, as you said earlier, and the publicity and the press releases and the announcements in the world won't change what I feel emotionally about what your brand stands for.
And I have choices. I'll go
Yes.
someplace else. Yeah.
Oh yeah, very
Yeah.
easily.
Right.
We have lots of choices. We'll make different ones every day if we feel it. If we
That's
feel
right.
it. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about you and your personal journey. Now we're going to take off the CDO title, and you are, and this is another conversation I've had with executives at major corporations on Beyond the Hype, because especially right after when everything was, the COVID was at full peak. We didn't know what was going to happen. We were feeling the rawness of seeing this footage over and over and over again of George Floyd dying on the street, and an executive I interviewed, I think from Warner Media, was saying at the same time she was managing all these challenges with her team and their people, and by the way, people that in many cases she hadn't seen face to face yet because we were all isolated. She also had to manage her own progress
Yep.
and emotions, and in her case, as a Black woman with two Black sons.
Yep.
Talk to me about your own personal journey, evolution, enlightenment, revelations as a man, as a Black man, and as a professional who brings himself. I mean, you don't leave your emotional
That's
self
right.
at home, you bring that to work. Talk to me about your experience.
Yeah. This was unlike any experience I've had in my career. So
Mm,
I think that most people who identify with any diversity, whether you're Black, Hispanic, gay, whatever, you probably have had experiences where you felt like you needed to compartmentalize
yes,
in the
yes.
past. And I'm definitely like, have had those experiences.
Mm,
But this was a time where when George Floyd, and I actually wrote a LinkedIn article about it, like when he got killed and you actually saw it, and you saw it happen. I mean, you, you could not be sane and not be touched by that.
right, right.
And um, and so I did need to do my own processing and my own decompressing and my own mourning and my own processing of my fear and my own experiences of driving and whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but the business needed me to show up as the leader. The business needed me to come in every day, and it was raw and it was happening, and we needed to make decisions, And so it was a balancing act because to a certain extent, I did have to continue to compartmentalize, to be thoughtful, to be open to, because at those points you kind of want to just to go inward into your own perspective and your own experiences and dealing with your own feelings. But you have a bunch of people who are going through the same thing, and some people who didn't know how or what to do. And so what I did was I tried to find a balance of bringing my authentic self to work, and but doing it professionally and in a way where it's providing, I think, a critical difference or advantage to help advise or inform our strategy and our approach. So, for example, one of the things that we decided to do, and again, with the full support of my CEO and our board of directors and our ELT, we had some conversations, and I'm like, you know, for a period of time, we're going to need to focus on Black people and Black issues. And we're going to be unapologetic about it. And I'm going to need your support. And I don't know if I didn't have these experiences as a Black man or hadn't been going through that, that I would have been able to leverage that, you know, and say it in a way where they understood it and with the credibility and the forcefulness that it needed to be said. So, you know, it was a mix of everything all over the place. But what I tried to do is to pull from those experiences and and leverage the relationships and the credibility that I had over that career and kind of marry the two as much as I could. You know, it wasn't always successful. Some days, you know, once you sign off, because you know everybody was remote then,
Right,
so
right.
you would sign off that last call and you would just you decompress.
Yes.
You just be exhausted, and then it was the TV and the articles and everything is just coming at you. But again, I wouldn't have traded that experience for the world because I really think that if not me, it needed to be someone like me doing that work at that time. And I would have to say, you know, I keep mentioning it because it's not a small issue, and I'm sure that with the conversations that you have, to have a CEO that was a true partner that asked the question, "What do you need?" You know, that says, "Hey, I want to say this, but I want to say it right." You know, to ask those questions and to be authentic and legitimate, to have a board of directors say, you know, we have Black board members, we have Hispanic board members who are saying, hey, tag me in. Let me do some roundtables. Let me do some town halls. Let me talk about my experience. Hispanic Network. Let me talk about our partnerships there. So, you know, I've mentioned that over and over because I don't take it lightly because I've talked to a lot of my counterparts who don't have that.
Oh yeah.
And so that's what I think makes Synchrony such a special place.
It is a key differentiator. Again, this is something a space that we, for obvious reasons, have been following for decades. You know, because we see it as an industry, not just as a function. And when it's almost like any other function of the company. If the CEO and the board cares about it, it's going to happen.
Everybody's gonna care about it, right?
Everybody's going to
Even
care
if they
about it.
don't care about it, they're gonna care
This,
about it. Right,
they're not just saying they care about it. This is for real. Even the
right.
other thing you mentioned, yeah, our part of our compensation is tied to this. I
That's right.
know, and that was definitely one of the things that came out of. You saw an emergence, and these are many of the CEOs that our CEO Butch Graves was interviewed on his show from the corner office, because you had this. You could almost see a literal differentiation of a group of CEOs and board leaders who were like, no, we're leaning into this, and that gives direct and indirect permission for everybody in the organization, no matter where they fall, to say, yep, they're not playing. This is for real. So we
Right.
better deliver some actual results. It's not just saying the right things and looking the right way. It's actually delivering results because we're going to have to be accountable, to your word earlier, to them. Even if I don't care what the rest of the world thinks, I'm going to be accountable to my CEO, and
That's
we're
right.
going to deliver some results. Um, Listen, in the time that we have left, I always want to talk a bit about what we see going forward. We try to end all Beyond the Hype interviews with a future focus. And again, this is an ongoing, this is generational change that so we can't say, oh yeah, what I would expect to happen is in 100 years But you do have goals, both professional goals,
Mhm.
both standards you're being held to, literally for your job, and things that you, as an expert and person with lived experience, can hope to see.
Yeah.
So, if you were to see what you hope to see, both inside Synchrony and in general, in terms of, let's say, corporate diversity, in terms of best standards and practices, and the results that they can produce, what do you see happening over the short term, say the next 2 to 5 years, and where we are as corporate leaders, as corporations, and as a society?
Well, I think what I would say is I think that in a lot of cases we're moving in the right direction.
Hmm.
Um, but given the climate that we have in society right now, it seems like we take two steps forward, then we take a
Yes.
step back,
Yes.
and um, yeah, things are contentious in spaces where I don't think they necessarily need to be.
Mm.
But what I would say is that what I'm proud of now, and I hope it improves, is that Synchrony seems to be one of those unique places or safe spaces where, look, I'm not going to pretend that we don't have different perspectives and perspectives that I don't necessarily agree with. But hopefully, we're a place, and we've demonstrated to a certain extent anyway, that we're a place where those we can be respectful, that we can agree on a core set of values. People understand that if you don't believe in those values, this isn't the place for you. And then perspectives can be discussed, and we don't have to necessarily agree, but we will try to understand and appreciate as much as possible. In terms of a North Star, I think that we strive to get to a place where, from a representation perspective, that the workforce of Synchrony mirrors what society is. So, we know that in the U.S., for example, 50% of people are women. We want to have 50% of our workforce be women, and we're already close to that. But at Synchrony was different. We look at it at every level. So I don't want our 50% be made of, and this is again where I was talking about earlier about peeling the onion and really aggregating the data is 75% of the women at Synchrony are, below manager, and we have no representation at the VP plus level, then we're not doing what we need to be. So I want to see Black people, Hispanic people, people who are self ID categories represented at the appropriate levels at all levels of the organization. So that's kind of like low hanging fruit of what we aspire to be. But in terms of the fabric of Synchrony and hopefully, the broader organization, I'm hoping that we continue to have more companies in corporate America do what we talked about earlier. That it's not just a point of time. A lot of people, it was a scramble to get a chief diversity officer
Yeah.
and a scramble to get ERG set up, and they've done that. Okay, that's passed. Like, let's get back to work. That it truly is woven into the fabric of what we do and how we do it. I don't think that our employees are letting it go as they shouldn't. I could hope that they continue to feel empowered to hold us accountable, and I hope that we continue to attempt to rise to the occasion and meet the needs as much as possible on an ongoing basis.
The other question I'd like to ask, because it does again speak to the future, what advice would you give to,
Mm.
whether it's your peers who you mentioned a lot of companies came to this diversity effort new. Like they may have hired their first CDO, or maybe they had a diversity initiative, but they don't have the same history and legacy of all companies that have been in this game for a while. And obviously, you don't hold that against them if they're coming to the party and they're ready to do it and up level what they've been doing. But often, like I said, they got their first CDO. It's their first time having ERGs. It's their first time really trying to integrate and change the culture of their companies, which is very different from companies that may have upgraded their efforts, but they've been doing this for a long time. I mean, again, we can name, you and I both could name the companies that this is not a new game. They may have upgraded and changed what they're doing, but it's not new to them.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to, let's say, a CDO, whether they're an experienced one going to a company that's new to these types of efforts, or maybe it's their first time being a CDO, that they've been in other roles and they got recruited and they took advantage of this opportunity. What advice would you give them as for them to really kind of be successful, but they're starting from a different level than you may have been starting when you took on this role at Synchrony?
Yeah, a couple of things we talked about. Definitely, if you do everything that you can do to get the support of your board, your CEO, your ELT, because they and make sure that they don't just support you, but they understand that they co-own this with you. Because if
Mm.
you have an organization that's looking for you to do the work, versus like if we're doing a diverse hiring strategy, you're doing the hires and you own it. You own it. So they have to be true partners with you. And don't be afraid to ask for that and to be able to clearly articulate that need for success. So that's one thing. We talked about the importance of data. You can go in and you can have all kinds of perceptions of what the company is or is not, or is doing well or not so much. And you'd be surprised that when you start to look at the data, what the data is telling you. The data leads Synchrony into create our diverse talent strategies. And data isn't just a one point in time thing. As you continue to do it, then you realize, hey, I should be, looking at this as well. Like I talked about our staffing data or our recruiting data, and listen to your clients. When they're asking questions, try as much as possible to provide them with the data that they need so that they can own it and they can feel empowered to make the change that you're partnering with them to make. So the data is important. But the last thing I'd say, and this is probably less, this is kind of more broad, is to trust yourself and to, especially if you're new at this, to have the courage to ask for what you need and to push. Don't be afraid to disrupt or to slow things down or to stop things. If you're like me, then you have the business experience first before doing this, and you can think like, oh, what is this going to do for the business? But if you're doing things that are supportive of diversity and the broader business, then this is right for the business as well. So sometimes you have to say stop. Sometimes you have to say, that's not right. Or sometimes you have to slow things down. And sometimes you may be the only voice, but that's the job you signed up for. So you have to be okay with doing that. And so, and then you're not alone. So sometimes when you feel like you're the only one, reach out to me or some of the other CDOs. What I found is I might be going through it for the first time, but I reach out to so and so and they've gone through it before. And so we're a community. So those are kind of the things that have helped me along the way.
That thing about remembering you're not alone, but just it's great life advice in general.
Yeah.
I know we at Black Enterprise, we on a regular basis, obviously we haven't done it since the pandemic, we would have literal CDO roundtables. We would bring 8 or 9 CDOs together,
Yeah.
closed doors, nothing leaves the room, but let's share best practices.
And we need that.
Yeah, because
We need
and
it.
then
Yeah.
some of the CDOs that were people that I just got this job for the first time. I don't really know if I have full support. I don't really know that and I remember advice from a former CDO who said you need to be holding the CEO accountable, and the CEO should be holding you accountable. Something's
That's right.
wrong if you're not constantly knocking on the CEO's door, but
That's
something's
right.
also wrong if the CEO doesn't ever ask you what you're doing. It's like as long as there's a problem,
That's right.
that there needs to be both sides. Like it's a partnership, like you said. It's not one
Yeah.
side or the other. Michael, this has been an incredibly enlightening conversation. I don't know if there's something you want to add or leave our audience with, but again, you were everything that was promised to me when they said you need to get Michael Matthews as a guest on Beyond the Hype. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave?
No, I enjoyed the conversation. I just appreciate it. But, I just, hopefully it came across the passion
Mm.
I have for the work that we do. And that's important that we do it. And, I'm proud of some of the progress we made. I'm really proud of Synchrony. But I guess the only thing that I would say is that I don't think we'll ever get to a finish line.
Right.
The more work we do, the more work we have to do. And that's part of the job. But I'm excited to do it, but I really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, one of the things I've learned is that more work is the reward for good work.
Nah,
More work is
that's
the
good. I
reward
like
for
that.
good work. Yes, yes. Listen, everyone, you've been listening to and enjoying, I know as much as I have, a conversation with Michael Matthews, CDO at Synchrony. And you just heard another edition of Beyond the Hype. This episode was brought to you by Synchrony. Listen, I look forward to seeing you the next time. Digest what you heard, because the test of a good show is what you do after you heard the show. So this is Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP, Executive at Large for Beyond the Hype. Take care. Celebrate the excellence in Black men at the Black Enterprise Black Men Excel Summit. Meet our country's best and brightest Black men who are redefining their image.
We need to make sure that the world knows that we are here and that we are doing our business, so let us salute ourselves for that.
Be there this October 12th through the 14th at the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center in National Harbor, Maryland.
It's time for people to see that Black men are doing great things and doing it positively.
By doing this Excel Summit, it empowers us, it inspires us to be more creative and to do things that we haven't necessarily or traditionally done.
I met some great people here that I plan to do business with in the future, and I plan to learn from.
This was an eye-opening experience.
For more information, log on to blackenterprise.com/BMX.